Muslim pound is very strong and very influential. And if it's harnessed in the right way, it can be used as a tool for change and a tool for goodness.
Welcome to another host of the Muslim Pound podcast. I'm Zaid, your host, and today we have Afsor Ullah, who is a master in Islamic finance law and is also known as the Muslim Martin Lewis. Welcome to the podcast.
Assalamu alaikum. Not quite the Muslim Martin Lewis, but yeah, somewhat, yeah.
But you have been on Islam channel talking about personal finance.
I have, yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, so what's the beginning of the journey for you in your Islamic finance law? So where did it all begin? So I suppose as a family, we've always been quite religious in terms of, the way which we were raised, and so things like avoiding interest, avoiding riba in all forms, we saw we're doing from a very young age anyway. So we're very, as a family, we believed in making sure that we weren't falling foul of that. So even as a student, for example, I didn't have any student loans. I wasn't in any student debt, alhamdulillah. And the way in which I funded university was, back then there was a grant which you could access, which was great, and that covered the tuition fees. And then there was a £1,000 grant which the government gave. And I basically lived off that. On top of that, I also, alhamdulillah, managed to win some various prizes, if you like, from various bodies, and that also helped as well. So I guess that's where my journey sort of started from a young age. But in terms of what I'm currently doing, during the course of my training contract, I came across Islamic Bank of Britain, as it was then known, and a lot of the property work which I was doing involved IBB. And when I started doing that work, I started looking more and more into it. And I remember the turning point was I attended a lecture by Sheikh Tawfiq Chowdhury on, it was called the Real Deal by the Al-Kath course. And he spoke all about Islamic finance and the importance of making sure that, we weren't falling foul of getting into any interest-based contracts or even supporting or in any way helping others sort of do interest-based transactions. And I left that course and I came home and I said, I need to refocus my career, in my legal career, and move away from, acting for conventional banks and conventional lenders, and actually just focus on Islamic finance. And that's when I made the intention. And in fact, I stopped taking on any clients that were doing anything that was non-Sharia compliant. I stopped acting for any clients that were doing anything other than Islamic Bank of Britain mortgages, or if they were buying property and they were using other finances, I just casually just turned them to a different colleague of mine, because I just didn't want to get involved in it anymore. Where did your interest in law come from? Was it from a very young age?
I had a love-hate relationship with law, as probably most people probably do with their careers, right? So when I was in primary school, I was always known to be someone who was very argumentative, or someone who liked debating, and someone who liked speaking, and public speaking was something which that I was known for. So at that age, I watched all the sort of legal dramas. My cousin Vinny is probably one of the classic ones, which got me interested in law at a young age. Watching Joe Pesci on the screen was definitely what intrigued me, if you like. And then I went to secondary school, and that interest in law sort of grew. And I thought, okay, maybe I should think of this as a career. We did a magistrate's court mock trial for my school, and I represented my school in a fake criminal trial, and I lost my case. And cried about it, and said, you know what, forget it, I'm not going to do law ever again. So I turned my back on law. And then I went to did my GCSEs, did A-levels, and I guess in my AS level, I again reached the junction as to what I should be doing next. And at that point, I was very much interested in writing, in presenting, in doing journalism, in fact. And I was considering becoming a journalist as my, for that to be my career. I would have been as famous as Raghi Umar now. And at that point, I asked my mom, I said, what should I do? And then my mom said, look, I want a lawyer in the family, so can you do law? And that was it, really. That was the extent of why I did law. So there's no sensational story. It was literally, mom said do it, and birrul walidain, respect your parents. Khalas, I said I'll do law, and that was it.
What was her reason of wanting you to do law?
My elder brother started off. He was very much the lawyer, if you like. So him, from a very young age, carried himself like a lawyer. People used to call him a barrister, and he wanted to do law. He did started law. He started a law degree, and he hated it. He started his first year, hated it, and dropped out within a month or so. Then tried to do a degree in computer science because that was a thing back then. And then dropped out of that, and then took a gap year, and then he's now a teacher. And so mum was sort of let down, and said, he was the one that was meant to be the lawyer. And then, and then there's a brother in between us, and he also became a teacher. And then mum said, look, you're gonna do it. And I said, fine, I'll try. I said, look, you've got my daughters, and I'm going to push you to sort of do that. And that was it. I applied for law. Doing it was very tough. Just even getting in, for example, I had to get 3 A's, or what would be an A stars now at A level, to sort of get into UCL where I went. And then the actual degree itself was very dense, very, very boring. I recall falling asleep to some of the lectures, and every, the first semester was always during Ramadan. So trying to catch up on reading and do your Taraweeh and do your Quran and everything else and break your fast, you just didn't have your time. So every single year I was behind an entire month, basically. So it was tough, alhamdulillah. But look, by the grace of Allah, and with my mum's dua, I should say, my father passed away before that. Alhamdulillah, I was able to finish that very difficult degree.
How difficult is the training contract? Because TV programs as well. I wanted to become a lawyer, but I think it was a bit too boring for me. And then you watched things like Suits and where the training contract and associates are just put through rigorous measures.
Well, actually, to be fair, in the American system, there is no training contract, if you like. So in Suits, for example, the character Mike Ross, as soon as he leaves Harvard, he becomes an associate, right? So there is no training contract. You sort of go into the job immediately once you finish your New York bar and everything else. So in America, it's slightly different. Your training contract, it doesn't exist. You're sort of a first year associate, second year associate. With in the UK, and it's changed somewhat now because there's alternative routes to qualification. But the historic way was you did a 2-year training contract with a law firm, and in that 2 years, you sort of did 3 or 4 different seats in different areas of law. So you had to cover everything. Well, not everything, but it was various laws, but you had to cover one contentious part as well. So like litigation, basically. How tough was it? Your experience of a training contract would differ based on what firm you sort of go to. So if you go to a large corporate law firm, in some ways it's easier because some of the trainees, they aren't given massive amounts of responsibility. But in the other sense, it can be a bit more difficult because the hours expected in those types of law firms is long. So, you are expected to sort of, work long hours, log off very late, sometimes work during the weekends. So in that sense, it can be quite difficult and it's sort of very tedious tasks. Now, if you contrast that with a small law firm, and I'm grateful that I was able to do part of my training contract in a small law firm and finish in a big law firm. But when I started my training contract in a small law firm, the difficulties there are that number one, from day one, you're effectively doing file work, you're acting for clients, you're acting on transactions at the same time whilst you're being trained by your training supervisor. But of course, when you have clients coming in and out, they're not expecting for you to say, I will find the answer for you. They're expecting to say, what's the answer? How do I get this transaction done? How do I get X, Y, and Z done? They don't see the word trainee. They see, no, you are a solicitor, so you should be doing all these things. So that came with its own challenges. Yes, the hours weren't that long. I was logged off. We were closing the firm at 5:30 every day. I was home by 6:30. But the pressures were there because you had pressures from clients, you had pressures from financials, you had pressures from doing the work. So you're effectively doing the work and learning at the same time. But the advantage was I feel like that made me a better lawyer.
Yeah, because you're kind of just chucked in the deep end.
Yeah.
And then obviously whatever you soak in, you kind of learn a lot more.
Yeah, it's literally sink or swim. it's sink or swim.
You mentioned earlier that when you went into Islamic finance law, you stopped doing all the other transactions. You were working at a firm, of course, at that time. How easy was it just to stop doing transactions?
I mean, thankfully, the firm that I worked at, it was already doing a large number of Islamic transactions anyway. So the conventional stuff, it wasn't doing much of anyway. There were enough lawyers in the firm for that work to be divided out or given to some others. And then occasionally, if I couldn't divide it out, I'd have to act on it to a certain degree, but then I'd always reserve some parts of it, i.e. witnessing any mortgage deeds or anything of that sort. I'd just say, look, I can't do it. I'll just get a colleague to sort of do it because I wasn't comfortable doing it myself.
Okay, and then did you have to have any kind of qualification, like an additional qualification, or was it just more reading about the paperwork behind it?
For Islamic finance, there is a qualification called the IFQ, the Islamic Finance Qualification, and there are many that have done that. It's something that I wish to do at some point. But in terms of any formal qualification, I haven't got any formal Islamic finance qualification. My qualifications are my experience and my own reading, basically.
So what's the kind of key difference between a property transaction with a conventional mortgage and a property transaction with an Islamic finance mortgage? Because obviously we've had this conversation quite a few times before, but you can't have certain solicitors act for someone who's getting out an Islamic mortgage.
Yeah, so in terms of what the difference is, I guess it's very similar to asking the question, what's the difference between a Muslim marriage contract and a non-Muslim marriage contract? And if you were to compare both of them, actually, both of them could have the exact same features. Both could have the dowry, both could have the bride's father's name, both could have all the features in which you'd expect to see witnesses and everything else. But why is one halal and why is one haram? And I think it's the same with Islamic finance to a certain degree, in that within Islamic finance, the contracts and agreements themselves, they are designed, if you like, to keep in mind most of the Sharia principles, so that as few of them are breached as possible. Bearing in mind, Islamic finance sits within regulation and UK law.
So how difficult is it then to kind of devise a complete Sharia-compliant Islamic finance contract under UK law? I
don't think any company that claims to do Sharia-compliant financing can ever say that this is fully Sharia-compliant. This is completely, to the core of what their Sharia aims and principles are. And there's a very famous Mufti who said, look, being Sharia compliant and being having, which is something that embodies the maqasid, the aims of the Sharia within the contracts, these are two very different things, right? So and every single contract that I've looked at that's currently out on the market, they've all got different aspects which scholars would say these things aren't good or these things don't work. So if you're asking me, which ones or how do you sort of navigate that? I guess you have to go by what the scholars are sort of trying to do in terms of maneuvering the various obstacles, if you like.
And how are they kind of trying to do that?
So you've got the main transaction, the main structure which everyone's aware of, which is diminishing musharaka, where you've got the bank and the customer that go into a partnership, and then there's a lease back which is arranged. That's quite commonly used. You've got other companies now that are using a corporate structure, without mentioning the company's name, but they sort of using a corporate vehicle where people will take shares in that company. There's also the murabaha method, which again, they're all controversial. They've all got scholars that have said, these things don't work. These things are problematic. There are issues in which how these are done, and to all of that, I'd say yes, absolutely. There are issues, and there is plenty of room for progression and development.
So, what would you say the progression, through your experience, what would you say the progression and the solutions are?
I did an article about this recently in terms of looking at what is next for Islamic finance. How do we take Islamic finance to the next level? And I think the question often gets asked, yeah, but if these aren't Sharia compliant, why on earth do we bother with them? Why don't we just go and use the average mortgage from the various high street banks? And a lot of scholars have said, look, well, firstly, it's not your job to
decide for the ummah what is halal and haram, right? You need to decide for yourself. But in terms of how to develop it next, I think it's going to take changes at the regulatory level, so at governmental level, and in terms of making sure that the UK law and everything else supports and aids any new structures that are put in place, and that requires people like myself and people that are high up in the government to make sure that any changes are lobbied properly, so that any changes that are made, those things are recognised by the various financial regulators that we have. But beyond that, I think if Islamic finance is to get the barakah in which I think we need in order to succeed, I think the players within Islamic finance just need to look inwardly and ask the question, do we believe in what we're doing? Are we doing this genuinely to help Muslims accomplish the aims of the Sharia? And the aims of Sharia, look, it does include protecting wealth and generating wealth, right? There's nothing wrong with having that as one of your objectives. For the Muslims, it should be something which we aspire to. We can never, one of the ways in which we'll be able to improve ourselves is if we ourselves are in a financially better position, right? So there's nothing wrong with having that objective, but are we doing it properly? Are we governing ourselves properly? Is the way in which we, our corporate governance models and everything else, are we ourselves Sharia compliant, or are we just having a rubber stamp just to make money? And if it's the latter, in terms of the only reason we're doing it is just to fill our pockets and we don't really believe in Sharia compliant structures, then I think we're doomed to fail, right? And I think your sincerity will shine through. And I think those who are the consumers of Islamic finance, if I believe that that's the first thing which they'll take is, look, these aren't sincere people. These aren't people who genuinely believe in Sharia and genuinely are trying to help Muslims. These are just people who are trying to make a quick buck and move on. So I think that's what I think needs to change. I think the internal governance of all the Sharia compliant structures that are currently in place, they all need an overhaul, and they all need to reconsider how they are doing it. Now look, it's not going to work for some companies, but some companies are in it for the money effectively and they don't really care. But for others, I think that's what needs to be done next.
How difficult is it to actually lobby the government though? Because obviously it's a complete different governance essentially that you need for Islamic finance to match their principles along with our principles.
Yeah, so one of the great things about the UK system is that we've got statutes and we've got common law, right? So we've got the key laws which are grounded in statute, and we've also got common law in terms of how it's sort of played out in the courts. But with statutes, there's always an ability to have statutory amendments that can go through the House of Lords, and it can amend existing legislation quite quickly. So one of the changes, for example, that we were involved in was when they first announced the STLT surcharge for second properties. So when that was first announced, that would immediately impact all Muslim clients and customers, because by virtue of you buying under a diminishing musharaka structure and the bank owns the asset, your first property will always be deemed and treated by tax purposes to be a second property, because it's not the bank's first property, right? They're doing thousands, each week. So that was a massive problem, and that was one thing that which the government, hadn't taken into account. So, we spent the first month after that, well, in fact, the first week before it came out and the first month after that, speaking to the HM Treasury to ensure that there was a statutory amendment that looked at what is the financial institution behind any given transaction. And thankfully, they did roll out the amendment quite quickly. Actually, I think within 3 weeks, we had a draft amendment, and we were told, look, you can rely on this, and this will be rubber stamped in the House of Lords very soon.
So does the new government change any of the lobbying, or does it kind of continue?
Well, with the civil service, that obviously the civil service stays permanent in terms of governmental policies and the attitudes towards Islamic finance. That's the only thing that changes. But I have to say, successive governments over the last 20 years have all been very supportive of Islamic finance. And this is the one thing that I say to when I meet clients from the Middle East and clients looking outwardly to invest into the UK, is that successive UK governments have all pledged and said, look, we want to make the UK a centre for Islamic finance. Theresa May promised that, David Cameron promised that before that, and they've all been very much supportive of that. So I'd be surprised if the current government changed its stance on that.
I think one thing that I've seen, which is lacking from an Islamic finance point of view, this goes back to kind of 2004, is the lack of education given out in terms of exactly what the Islamic finance model is. Because I think what happens, or what has happened as well, people just see the model, read about it online or wherever they used to read about it before, and say, okay, this is just repackaging interest. And I think now you've got the likes of IFG who release article after article, yourself, you do articles, and just generally educating the public. But what more do you think is needed to kind of bridge that gap? Because I still see on social media there's a massive gap between people using Islamic finance, people understanding Islamic finance.
I think we have to be slightly careful with the education piece, right? In terms of people who are against Islamic finance. You know, I've met many people that are against and staunchly against Islamic finance, and they've said, look, this is just a riba product which you've repackaged, right? Now, look, there are those that are genuine in that concern, and they've looked into Islamic finance in detail, and they've said, look, we've looked at it in great depth, and we don't think this goes far enough to be considered Sharia-compliant or halal, in fact. And those are the ones which I like to talk to in depth, and I sort of like to engage with, because those are the ones who you can have a decent discourse with, because they've properly researched into it. Now, there are others who will just go around saying it's not halal, and then when you ask them, okay, so why don't you think it's halal? And then they'll give you all these reasons, which they've got off the equivalent to the Daily Mail, right? The local pages or whatever it is, without having done much research. And then we really drill down into it. The end point is say, oh, but it's too expensive. So you're like, okay, so your issue with Islamic finance isn't actually the substance of it or the form of it. Really and truly, it's because you don't want to pay it. So actually, if I went to Tesco's or if I went to one of the supermarkets and maybe the chicken is cheaper there, perhaps I should buy those chickens instead and not go to the halal shop, because it's cheaper, right? But you wouldn't take the attitude with that, so why would you do it with your money for? And I think those who are, who don't believe in Islamic finance, I think that's the question that they should be asking themselves. Am I against it because I truly believe that what it's doing is incorrect? And if so, fine. I think that for those, more education needs to be done. But for everyone else who actually are just acting on the desires, if you like, the shuhha, they're acting on whatever they actually want, and they are remodeling their answer to say, I'm not doing it because it's haram, so because it's the same. I think those are the ones that I find issue with, because actually you truly, really and truly, the reason you haven't done it is because you don't want to have that extra amount to pay.
Why is Islamic finances and Islamic mortgages more expensive?
If you consider the major banks that are trading, and they've got sort of various treasury facilities, and they've got a large mortgage book, obviously those banks are able to take more risk. They're able to offset some of the costs which would normally be passed on to individuals, borrowers, if you like. Obviously they've got bigger operational teams and everything else. And they've been in the industry for a while. Naturally, they can have lower cost, right, in terms of when they're lending money out. Their costs will naturally be lower, and their cost of borrowing is also lower as well. So, but with the Islamic banks, obviously sometimes their cost of borrowing is quite high. So immediately before they've even come to the borrower, they've had to get that money from somewhere else, and most likely they've got a different arrangement with those funders, which they then need to add on some for their own profit, add on some for the operational costs, and then in the end, that's passed back on to the customer, who's ultimately footing the bill for all of that. Which is what makes it more expensive.
Who funds the Islamic banks? Where do they get their funding?
It all depends. So they're all funded by different. They're all funded differently. So there's no one. Unfortunately, there's no one sort of rich man sitting somewhere in Ivory Tower that lends. No. There's different ways in which it's funded. So some of it might be through private funding. Obviously, you mentioned IFG. They've got a certain funding line. There's other lenders, bridging lenders, that they've got their funding sourced from various different places.
Now you've got banks, you've got Al Rayyan Bank, you've got Gatehouse, and then you've got a lot of other products like FIDA, Kestrel, Nesta, Curate as well as an investing products. What do you kind of see the future of the mainstream Gatehouse, IBB, even Habib Bank?
I think I think the ones you mentioned, they've all got different roles to play within Islamic finance, right? You mentioned Kestrel, for example. I know the brother Kestrel quite well. He's doing fantastic work in terms of the way in which he's designed his app. I think he's doing something very important in terms of helping with budgeting, which again, the preservation of wealth is an aspect of Islamic finance. And I think they've all got their places, and they've all got their parts to play within Islamic finance. But I also believe that across the board, all of the companies that are doing Islamic finance also need to inwardly practice Islamic finance far better, I think.
What do you mean by that?
So if you look at the ethical finance, for example, or I don't know, if you look at the ESG principles, which companies are now very much up on, every company has now got an ESG policy. ESG looks inwardly at governance of the companies, governance in terms of where the money is going to, all of that sort of stuff, right? And ESG has now become so prominent that many have asked, hold on a second, so you had Islamic finance, why didn't Islamic finance address the concerns that the ESG narrative is now doing? And the answer is there is no answer, to be honest. It's because Islamic finance for far too long has been focused on avoiding riba, avoiding interest, and to be fair, just avoiding interest, right? And it almost reminds me of the early generation of Muslims that came into the UK. The early generations of Muslims, their concern was mosques and halal shops, right? How can we get our halal meat and how can we pray our 5 prayers, right? And obviously, as Muslims, we've now moved on. There's now Muslims have been born in the UK. There's been 3rd, 4th, 5th generation Muslims now that have been born and bred in the UK, right? Some who don't even speak a second language other than English, right? So now we've gone past the halal shops and the masjids. With Islamic finance, my concern is we haven't gotten past how do we avoid interest. I feel like that was a concern. That is a concern that should continue to be addressed. But the next question is, well, what else should we be doing as Islamic finance providers? Should we not be having governance structures within our companies that is also Sharia compliant? Should we have other things that closely mirror, I feel like, ESG, but actually follow Islamic principles in terms of how in which companies operate, and all of these things? And I think these things are important.
What is the ESG narrative that you're speaking about?
Yeah, so with ESG, obviously the United Nations, I think it was in 2000 and I forgot when it was now. They introduced the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And they put forward criteria in which, for the next 20 or 30 years or however long it was, in terms of what we should be looking to sort of achieve in terms of net zero, in terms of looking at where our companies investing their money in, and making sure those things are ethical, and all of these things. So now companies now have these ESG policies, so that they will all be doing these things, looking at net zero, looking at carbon emissions, and all of these things, right? And I feel like Islamic finance companies should also have something equivalent to that, but not ESG. It's just going to be, look, we are a Sharia compliant company, and therefore everything which we do is based on that. We're not going to hide behind English contract law. We're not going to hide behind English corporate law. We are going to follow everything that we can that follows the Sharia. And I think that will change how everyone feels about Islamic finance.
Do you think it's almost as kind of building a model according to the Sharia compliant laws, and then the byproduct of that is that you'll avoid interest anyway?
I think with interest, you have to have a clever mechanism, right, in order to achieve, to avoid interest, because ultimately, you can't, the core of interest is that you can't make money from money effectively, right? So I think that's always going to require a level of thinking behind it. But in terms of, we started off this conversation about, people are a bit disillusioned by Islamic finance, and I think it's because people they don't perceive Islamic finance to be done sincerely, and I believe if the countries that were doing Islamic finance were started to govern themselves in that way, and outwardly the entire world saw that actually not only are they doing Sharia-compliant financing, but actually everything that they are doing embodies these Sharia principles and embodies ultimately, the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is ultimately, I think, where we sort of need to be going, because that sincerity is what's going to reach the hearts of everyone who's interacting with Islamic finance. I think that will bring about the change, because if we don't have that, I think we're just kicking the can down the road.
It's kind of like changing yourself before you change the world.
Yeah. It's like, it's almost basic principles. For example, there's one that we can apply quite easily. Pay your workers before the sweat dries, right? And unfortunately, the experience of most people that work under Muslims, for example, is the guy doesn't pay me, and I'm sure everyone knows someone who's worked for a Muslim, unfortunately, and they've experienced this. It's a very relaxed attitude. Why do you have this attitude for? As a Muslim employer, your salary should get to your employees probably before the day that they need to be paid, right? And it probably should be paid in advance, if anything, right? If you want to truly follow that sort of principle. And that's just one example. There are countless gems in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which we can look to see how can we apply these, right? And I think if we do that, I think we'll see the interaction with Islamic finance greater. I think those who will start to engage in it will increase, and that will only lead to progression and development.
You work for Hill Dickinson as a senior associate in the Islamic Finance Department.
Correct. Yeah.
Before you were working with Shakespeare Martineau.
Yes.
Again in the Islamic Finance Department, but they've done a lot of Islamic finance transactions. So what was the motivation behind your change?
So I spent 8 years at Shakespeare's, and I was acting primarily, almost exclusively on the bank side, if you like. And during the course of that time, I got to interact with numerous customer or borrower lawyers, and one of my frustrations in the 8 years was the service level which I saw that was being experienced on the borrower side was not up to scratch, or what I would consider to be good enough. And I just thought, why isn't there someone that's helping all these Muslim clients that are doing this transaction, helping them in the way in which we deserve, right? The Muslim pound, right? Why isn't there someone that's sort of doing that? And that was one of the motivations, if you like. And the other motivation was I wanted to broaden my horizons and going beyond just exclusively working in the way in which I was working, and to look at Islamic finance in a broader context. And I felt like I was too busy in my existing firm to sort of achieve that. So I went out to Dickinson, which gave me the platform to further increase Islamic finance in a way in which I wanted to sort of expand it.
So to give everyone an understanding of how large your firm is, how many employees does it have?
Well, probably in excess of about 1,000, I think. Across the UK, we are in Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, and obviously in London we have 2 offices, and then across the world we have Hong Kong, Singapore, Monaco, and we have offices in Greece as well.
So was your office the first one to have an Islamic finance department?
Yes, correct, yeah.
So what did it take from you to convince the partners and the board essentially to have an Islamic finance department, and then how did you build it?
It was essentially presenting a business case. As with any project, it's like going to the bank for a loan, right? The bank will say, well, why should we pay you for? Why should we give you the loan? Obviously, not loan because that's not Sharia compliant, but it's demonstrating. Look, there's a business case. This is the market of Islamic finance. This is what the Islamic finance market, the Islamic economy is worth, if you like, in the UK and abroad. And this is the work in which we can generate, and this is how in which we'll do it, in terms of having a very strict business plan. With KPIs and everything else. Once I presented that, so look, this is how I will achieve it,
the firm said, right, let's do it when we sign.
So then, in terms of building out a team and a structure, how easy or difficult was it?
I think it's, in Islamic finance, we are far and few, if you like. So there aren't many sole or Islamic finance practitioners. There are lawyers that will say they do Islamic finance, but they're not really practitioners. In terms of Islamic finance practitioners, there aren't many across the UK. You do get quite a few abroad in Qatar and Dubai and everywhere else. In the UK, there aren't that many. It was a lonely journey in terms of bringing others on board and training others up. You've sort of experienced the usual, we don't understand this, we don't understand what these words mean. These are foreign Arabic words which we can't pronounce. How on earth are we going to sort of do this work? But I have to say, all in all, I found the firm very accepting, to be honest.
You kind of had a choice in terms of go to a large firm, pitch your idea, or then kind of start on your own and build a team out there, which obviously requires good investment to the service level you want, plus the kind of clients you're servicing, because you're not just doing the average 3-bed house in East London or whatever. You're doing blocks and apartments and commercial units from Middle East and other areas. So if you were to go out on your own, how difficult would that actually have been?
I think with the legal market at the moment, in fact, I'd say with all markets, one of the major concerns of any practitioner is professional indemnity cover, which for lawyers is very pricey. So I've got family that are pharmacists and doctors and everything else, and their PI cover, surprisingly, the premium is quite low. But for lawyers, the professional indemnity cover is quite high, and then that initial premium, which is up to 3 million, is quite expensive. And then as you get higher and higher, your PI premium just goes up and up. So you can imagine you're paying that massive premium before you've made any money. You need to pay that premium off. Forget your premises, forget your staffing costs, forget your printer and your lights. You've got the premium to pay before anything else. And on top of that, you've got everything else. The lights on, and making sure that everything else sort of works. So the reason I didn't decide to do it on my own was, number one, I believed those costs were too high, which would distract me from giving good service to the client base in which that I wanted to serve. Number two, in terms of expertise, I'm not an expert in all areas of law. There's various other areas of law like corporate law, banking law, planning law, litigation, for example, which all require, in order to give it the best service, require specialists in those areas. Now, in the smaller law firms, the lawyer will do all those areas themselves, but they won't be an expert in any one of those areas. And my reservation about that was, if a client came to me and said, look, we want the best advice on this area, I wouldn't want to second guess and say, yeah, this is probably the right advice. I'd want to say, look, you want the best advice, this is the best lawyer for it. And this is how we can do it. You want to set up a fund in Singapore and bring it in here. You want to set up a fund in Malaysia and invest money into the UK. Here is a funds lawyer. Here is a tax lawyer. These are specialists. That's all they do. I couldn't do that on my own because you'd have to hire specialists in each area, and then you can just see your costs are just multiplying each time you sort of do that.
So then, do you actually help set up Islamic finance funds in the Middle East?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
How easy is that to do?
It's a longer discussion. There's issues surrounding tax and which is a much longer discussion to decide which forum in which to place your funds in. So the Middle East might not be the right place. For example, there's regulatory stuff to think about, tax things to think about, and it also depends on where your domicile is, obviously.
Okay, and then you have a lot of clients pretty much around the world. I've met you in Riyadh as well, if you remember. How are you getting these clients?
I spent the first 8 years of my life in my legal career just focusing on my trade, understanding how the law works, and just providing good service. I did that for 8 years, and I got to know numerous people across that time. And when you do something good and you provide a good service, and you are genuinely trying to
sort issues out. Yes, you'll charge a fee for that, and people are paying you for that. Absolutely, it's not, we're not sort of doing it for free. But people recognize that, look, this person has given me a good service, and you do that well enough, and you're responsive well enough, you start earning a good reputation. And alhamdulillah, it's through that reputation and through that service that I've managed to attract other clients. Most of the clients which I've attracted, they've all just come through previous networks and previous referrals, and sometimes I've just been very fortunate, alhamdulillah, to attract sort of big name clients.
Yeah, because you're quite well known in the industry, you have a good reputation, you're a very good network, as in everyone knows you. Anyone who mentions Islamic finance solicitor, yeah, Afsor is the person to go to. And obviously you're dealing with a higher level transactions, but then you also get the day-to-day buying a house. Do you still deal with them as well?
Absolutely. One of the things when I joined my firm, I said, look, Islamic finance cannot just be about helping the rich, the rich Muslims or the rich, those people who are the very wealthy to sort of make money. I'm happy to sort of do that work, and yes, they sort of pay the better fees, but Islamic finance is for everyone. It's for the average person buying their first home. It's for the average person who's financing a shop or whatever else they're doing. It's to help everyone, and I want to support that as well. And what the firm said to me was, "That's fine, you can do that, but you can't charge the same that the high street law firms will charge, because that just doesn't make any sense. We have higher overheads, we have higher premiums to sort of pay. So if you're going to be charging the same as the high street, then it doesn't work for us. And your charge-out rate is high. We're paying you more than if you were in a high street firm." So I said, fine. So I won't charge as high as what Dickinson, my firm, would normally charge. But I said I won't go as low as what the high street will charge. I'll meet somewhere in the middle. And I do still get approached from clients and who'll ask me, we're looking to buy a first home. I said, look, it's not going to be as cheap as the high street firms, but you might think what I've charged you is really high. But actually, if you compare it to what we normally charge, we've actually come down halfway in the middle there. And some clients appreciate that and they'll say, look, fine, we're happy to pay a bit more for the better service. But other clients will say, look, times are tough and, we're crunching numbers and we can't do it. And I say, that's fine, and I always make dua for that client. I say, look, I hope your transaction goes well and, I wish you the very best. If you need anything, let me know. You know where I am.
Yeah, I think like in this area, in East London, I think that's always going to be an issue in terms of costs and fees.
You'd be surprised actually. The Muslims are getting more sophisticated as time progresses. So yes, once upon a time, the solution to get working was to just knock off 50 quid from next door, and that would guarantee the job, right? So yeah, you go down, watch up a high street, and literally if you went door by door, by the end of it, you could probably count how many £50 you sort of saved by the end, right? And that would be the way to sort of win the work. But one thing that I've found is a lot of clients have realized you sort of get what you pay for. So, if you go to a firm and a lawyer that you're paying a bit more, you'll get the service, hopefully. And you'll get the responsiveness, the ability to call your lawyer and not be on some long list waiting or the bottom of a pile, or a lawyer that's out in court all day. No, you'll get the lawyer and the responsiveness which you desire, and also a lawyer which understands and how to navigate the intricacies of Islamic finance as well. So actually, I still get instructed by the average person that's buying a house, so long as they're willing and appreciate that they are paying a bit more. It's not a lot more, but it's a bit more than what the high street will charge.
So if, for example, a 3-bed house, conveyancing fee is about 1,500 here, how much would it be at your firm?
Yeah, so depending on the value, but assuming it was sub 500,000, we'll probably charge about £2,000.
Okay, so
it's not astronomically high, yeah. And that, as I've said, is very low for what we normally charge.
To be honest, even over here, you'd get lawyers or solicitors who charge 1,500, and you get another solicitor next door charge 2,500. So 2,000 is not bad as well.
I think so, but you'd be surprised at how many clients say, "You were way too expensive. I can't help you." Then,
What's your advice to anyone who wants to get into Islamic finance?
So I get approached by numerous students who say, I want to get into Islamic finance. I think the first question to ask is why. What is it about Islamic finance that interests you, and which area of Islamic finance interests you, right? So sometimes I'll get lawyers who are at the very early stages of their career and say, I want to specialize in Islamic finance. And I'm like, well, you just started your training contract. You're fresh out of university. This is the wrong time, I think, to be thinking about Islamic finance. Right now, you need to become the best lawyer you can be, right? You need to understand this stuff because the stuff you learn in law school is real life now. So to lawyers, I would say, who are early on in their journey, focus on becoming the best lawyer first, and have that in the back of your mind. And once you're reaching the end of your qualification, then decide how you want to get into Islamic finance, right? For everyone else, what I would say is, what aspect of Islamic finance interests you, and what is it about Islamic finance where you believe that you could fit in? Because there's numerous ways to fit in, right? There's not just one area. You could be work in charity, for example. Charity is a massive area of Islamic finance in terms of waqfs, in terms of all of these things that are supporting charitable aims. Hugely important in Islamic finance. I try to support as much as I can, and I, alhamdulillah, have been fortunate enough to be able to do so through my firm as well. And then obviously we've mentioned real estate. There's the structuring and fund side, which is a complete different area of law, which I'm not a specialist in, but I have specialists that do those things. Obviously, there's commodity trading. There's so many aspects of Islamic finance. I think that before you sort of get into it, you have to decide which part of it am I really interested in, and where do I see myself fitting in. Kestrel, for example, completely different area of Islamic finance, right? But again, equally important.
Yeah. So if someone wants to start an Islamic finance product today, be it similar to Kestrel or Cure or FIDA, and they come to you with saying, this is our model and this is our paperwork, what do you then do?
So if the person has thought about it properly, and obviously the main thing when discussing any model is obviously to work out how it sort of works and the intricacies. Now, assuming we get past that stage and it all fits okay, the next step that we would do is obviously look at structuring it from an English law point of view and seeing if we can structure it so that it works from a tax, from regulatory, from all those sorts of different angles, from a real estate. If it involves real estate, does it work from a real estate angle? Assuming it meets all of those tests and it works from those points of view, and we've tweaked it enough, we'd also then work alongside a Sharia supervisory board to get their sign off on it, to say, look, we think from an English law point of view it works, we think it meets all of these Sharia issues, but as a Sharia scholar, are you happy to put your name to that, to say, we've looked at it from a Sharia point of view. Number one, we think it works. Number two, we will provide ongoing governance for that product as well. Meet all those things, inshallah, you can launch a product.
Does the scholar then also provide kind of ongoing advice?
Yes, yeah. There are various different bodies
Yeah.
that provide the Islamic finance certifications. Obviously, you mentioned FIDA, for example, Curate. They've all got bodies behind them that are, number one, signed off on the products initially. Number two, will provide ongoing governance as well. That's a very important aspect of it.
Okay. Going on to Islam Journal, how did you get that gig?
So I met a brother in a networking event, and we were talking about Islamic finance and everything else. And then once they had I think a speaker dropped out of. So yeah, none of my stories are very sensational. So a speaker dropped out, and they said, "Oh, do you mind coming in and filling a gap for us?" As I want to discuss what was about Islamic finance. So when in an hour's time, I was like, okay. So got dressed and went to the studios, and next thing I was talking about Islamic finance, we're answering questions, and they told me that the viewer interest was up for that show. So then they asked me to come back again and again, and now I've got a regular slot every first Thursday of the month.
Oh, so that's next week? No.
So 1st of August.
Yeah, next week.
The next week. Good thing you prepared me. Yeah. So initially it was just discussing Islamic finance, whereas now I discuss more broadly, not just Islamic finance, but actually one thing that I've spoken to the brother at Kestrel about is about managing money, which is something I'm a firm believer in. How do we get Muslims more wealthy? How do we, why is it that Muslims haven't managed to get to the next level? What are we doing differently? We're earning more cash. We've got better jobs now. But why haven't we broken free from that? And it's all about, I think, managing your finances properly, living a rich life effectively.
Why haven't we grown that Muslim pound essentially?
Exactly.
So what's the reason you think that we haven't
So,
grown as a Muslim economy?
So one thing that I often talk about is living a rich life, right? And living a rich life, it differs from person to person, right? And you need to decide, what does living a rich life mean to me, right? How can I live my best life within the means in which I have, not comparing myself to someone who lives, I don't know, behind Regent's Park, or someone who lives in one of the ivory towers in Nine Elms. No, how do I live my rich life, and what is it that I can do to maximize my own earnings, right? That's the first question that we need to ask ourselves. And once we've worked that out, we then need to look at our own finances. Where is our money going? Well, how are we spending it? How are we saving it? How are we investing it, right? And these are questions which we have to ask ourselves very, very clearly, and then plan for that. So once we've worked out where our money is going, how our money is flowing, how do we then set aside pots, so we have savings and everything else. And once the money starts working for you, I believe that's when you can start living a life which will just feel more content.
So what advice do you give in terms of like setting up pots and kind of investing to saving to spending ratios?
Yeah. So the first point is, obviously, if you're in debt, come out of it, or make a plan as to how you're going to come out of debt. If it's a short-term plan, long-term plan, but make sure there's a plan to remove all debt effectively. That's the first step for those who unfortunately have fallen into debt. In terms of how to plan and everything else, one thing I found very useful is having a very basic spreadsheet in terms of, this is my income that's coming in, these are all of my outgoings, and this is the net amount which should be left every month, right? Now from the net amount, obviously then create several different pots. So you might have a social fund. You might say, right, I'm going to dedicate £100 a month or £200 a month. That would be used towards social stuff like going out, takeaways, whatever it is. That's how much I think I should be spending each month. And then you whittle down to what is your net amount. That should be the amount that which you put away each month. And that's how you'll gradually start building up your wealth, right? And by keeping within those parameters, one of the things that I can say personally that I was doing after I got married was just spending money everywhere, right? Going out, coffees, and you just find every month, where did the money go? It's all gone. Why haven't we got anything left? And and it's an endless cycle.
Yeah.
Until you break free from that, until you yourself start taking account for yourself, which is an Islamic principle, taking yourself into account, you will just carry on in that endless cycle, because it will be, next month I've got last month's debt to pay off, and I've got the previous month's debt to pay off, and then your money isn't working for you. You're just working from paycheck to paycheck. You can't do anything with your money. You can't invest it anywhere because you haven't got anything to save at the end. And I believe that there is room for everyone to have and follow that model.
One thing I found quite helpful is, example, you've got banks now like Starling, Monzo, Revolut, where you can set up kind of essentially pots, a saving pot, people set up hedge funds, people set up, for example, they want to go on holidays or a travel fund or whatever it is. And then the first of the month, after you've done that calculation, the first of the month, automatically, or whenever you get paid, automatically that money goes straight in. So then you're left with £600. That's your spending, your travel, your fuel, whatever it is. I think that's one thing I found really helpful.
Absolutely. This is, I think those apps that are available are definitely fantastic if you use them correctly. But on top of that, I think it's also looking at your lifestyle as well. What are we spending our money on effectively? Where's our cash going? What are the things which we can cut and what are the things that we can reduce as well. I think these things are equally important. And on top of that, obviously upskilling and making sure that we're getting paid properly, and we are working in jobs which are properly taking care of us as well.
I think that's the other part, because when it comes to saving money. There's only a certain amount you can save.
Yeah.
Whereas then there's also a part where you kind of have to increase your income. What kind of tips do you give to that on your show?
So in terms of increasing income, I mean, the first question to ask is, are you in a job which you're enjoying, and is it a job which you want to sort of stay in long term? If the answer is yes, then you need to ask yourself, so how do I get to the next promotion step or the next step in sort of my career? How do I sort of go upwards? If that's something that you desire, if your desire is don't really care, then obviously stay where you are. But if you are, I do want to get that sort of promotion, or I do want to sort of move up this sort of ladder. With every job is different, but it's having your eye on that and saying, right, so what's next? How do I get to the next stage? And that might be through upskilling. It might be, you don't have the necessary skills for the current role, so you might need to upskill to go upwards. It might be moving sideways. It might be going to a different role, completely, or a different team or department. Or ultimately, if it's not a company which is looking after you, then saying, actually, well, how do I go and work for a different company altogether, where the skills which I've acquired here, I can get paid for better. But you have to have that determination, basically. If you haven't got it, and if you don't desire it, then obviously you will stay stagnant, and that's fine. If that's what you're happy to sort of do, then alhamdulillah. But if that isn't, then obviously there are different things to sort of think about.
I think as a Muslim, we should have an ambition which far exceeds our way of thinking anyway. Like, dream big, have that ultimate vision. And if we have that, and our vision is something which benefits Ummah, for example, for yourself, it's you want to be that go-to person for Islamic finance globally, then that money will come anyway long term. And then it's about making them short-term short-term goals and achieving them short-term goals, which will naturally get your income up.
Yeah, no, that's true. Absolutely. I think the sincerity in what you're sort of doing is hugely important. In terms of making sure that your sincerity is aligned to in some way as to how can I benefit Muslims, how can I benefit the Ummah ultimately. And alhamdulillah, I've been quite fortunate. I'm sitting here. I'm quite fortunate that I've been, I've managed to have a job that's been linked almost, linked very closely, in fact, to my deen. Alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for that. But not every person will be in that sort of position. You might get someone who hasn't got that sort of job, so they almost need to think about it a bit differently, I think.
Yeah, potentially. But even, for example, you've got a doctor, they're still serving the Ummah. Even an accountant, they're serving the Ummah.
Yeah.
So there's certain roles, and I think within pretty much every role you can find a way. A scientist who wants to cure cancer, they're benefiting the Ummah. I know a scientist who's doing pretty much that. So there's always a way they can benefit the Ummah long term.
That's true. No, that's true. That's fair.
What legacy do you want to leave behind?
The legacy which I would like to leave behind. Tough question, actually. What would I like to leave behind? I'd hopefully want to have had some sort of impact with Islamic finance in furthering the message of it and bringing about some change, changing attitudes or changing the way in which it runs. That I hope will be my legacy. That I stood my ground and said things which were controversial in Islamic finance, but which brought about change for the benefit of the Ummah, and also to revive the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and also to further the message of Islam effectively to corners in which maybe it wouldn't have sort of reached. But ultimately, I hope my legacy will be that through Islamic finance, for the dawah to be spread. I think one thing that I've noticed is we've got a lot of influence with Islamic finance. The Muslim pound, which is a term I've heard before, by the way, the Muslim pound is very strong and very influential. And if it's harnessed in the right way, it can be used as a tool for change and a tool for goodness, right? It might start off with money, but actually it ends up
being somewhere else completely. I'll give you an example of that. I mentioned to you the changes that the HMT made for us very quickly, I should say, the changes that were made within 3 weeks of the legislation landing. I mentioned to you the successive governments that have said that they would support Islamic finance. All these things are very important because what's the underlying theme here is that, you know, that countries want Islamic finance. You know, the West, the UK wants Islamic finance to grow, and they will support that growth. And the way in which they'll support that growth is through other means, because, you know, arguably, if they aren't allowing Islamic finance to properly incubate in the UK, then it's not going to grow here. And you can just see where I'm going with this, because that will then lead to change in all areas, which will be good for Muslims that are here and also Muslims that are abroad as well.
I think that goes back to thinking big. The government itself, they're not thinking of the average person here. They're thinking of bringing in foreign investment.
Absolutely.
With Islamic finance, and they know that Qatari, he might not invest here. He might leave his hundreds of millions somewhere else.
Absolutely.
So that's the way they're thinking. And I think it's the same with us, that if we think big when it comes to change, whether that's to do with politics, whether that's to do with finances, whatever it's to do with, then we will implement that change. But there's other factors as well, such as we kind of have to be united, or not we do have to be united towards one goal. Because that's what the government do. They have their unity. But for us to kind of have change within ourselves and the whole ummah, we have to be united. So it's the same with Islamic finance. The scholars have to be united to say this is the way we want to move forward, and then they move forward. And I think that unity is what will bring about change.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think with you know, with ikhtilaf, obviously it's been around for a very long time, and I don't think we'll ever get full unity. I think there's always going to be a level of ikhtilaf amongst the scholars, differences of opinion. But you're absolutely right. I think we need to think big in everything in which we do. You know, I think if our aim is on the bigger and wider objective, it will harness and motivate us to sort of continue. And I've always had that in the back of my mind, is how can Islamic finance impact and go beyond what I'm doing in my day job.
If you had a Afsor next to you who is just about to choose what he was going to study at university, what would you say to him?
I would say to him, do law, actually. In hindsight, I'd say to him, do law. But I'd say to him, go with the journey and don't look at others whilst you're on your path, because that can make you get depressed. You know, don't think of where others are in their journey. Just focus on your own journey and have patience, because it will work out in the end, inshallah.
Inshallah. Afsor, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.